Okay, time of the end. In the previous session, I presented the gospel accounts compared to the seals in Revelations. The thing to take note of was the similarities that existed between both of these. Let's say they are pretty much identical in most respects. So now let's compare the trumpets to the vials. So on the first trumpet, you can see I got the trumpets on the left, the vials on the right. And I'm just going to read the highlights. I'm not going to go into the details so we can make it easy to learn. So on the first trumpet, something's cast upon the earth. We look at the vial. First vial is poured out upon the earth. On the second trumpet, we have something cast into the sea. On the second vial, it's poured upon the sea. So on the third trumpet, something fell upon the rivers and the fountains of water. On the third vial, we can see that the vial was poured on the rivers and the fountains of water. On the fourth trumpet, the sun was smitten. On the fourth vial, it was poured upon the sun. So that brings us to the first woe, the fifth trumpet. So now you should begin to see that there is a pattern forming between the trumpets and the vials. There are similarities, but varying degrees of intensity. So by the time we get to the first woe, and we see that the bottomless pit is opened, and that the demonic realm is about to manifest. So in the first woe, we see that men are tormented, and on the fifth vial, men are tormented. And again, there's darkness on the earth on both of these judgments. Now, what is interesting, I'll just pass by this, since the miracles that we're seeing done, these miracle judgments, beginning with the first trumpet, are in some respects identical to the judgments upon Egypt. So we can expect that probably the two witnesses begin their prophesying beginning with the first trumpet. And another point I'd like to point out, this first woe is 150 days in length. That's 5 months. So we begin to get some timing and duration here. Remember, these are biblical months. That's 30 days apiece. Moving on to the second woe, which is the sixth trumpet. Something's going on at the river Euphrates. There's this great battle. We turn to the vials and we see the same thing. Something's going on. The vial is poured on upon the river Euphrates. There's this great battle. Under the second woe, these demonic angels that are bound in the river Euphrates are released. You go to the vial, the sixth vial, we see these three spirits that come out of the dragon. So you can see the similarities. We move on to the second woe. I just want to continue with the things that are taking place. So on the second woe, this is where Jesus returns, places one foot on the sea and one on the earth. And there's some sealed and unwritten events. The prophesying again begins to the people, and the two witnesses are also prophesying and tormenting. Now, what makes this interesting, and I'll just, if you go back and read that where that occurs, it says, he, speaking to Jesus, set his right foot on the sea, his left foot on the earth, and cried out as if a lion roared, or the seven thunders uttered. John was about to write these events, but the angel said, write not. These events are sealed up. So these are unwritten. These are unknown mysteries that are unfolding now, and we can suspect that these might be warnings to the church. If you look at the sixth vial of wrath, there is a warning to the church. These might be warnings taking place right now through prophetic voices that God has raised up in this hour. I suspect this is happening right now, so we might be hearing of some things that simply are mysteries that are being revealed at this time. So that brings us to the third woe, the seventh trumpet. The restrainer is removed. So with the restrainer being removed, I suspect that a 42-month count begins, because we're going to see that the mystery of God is finished, it's complete, and the wrath of God begins. So this, with the mystery of God being finished, the restrainer being removed, it's likely we will see a man step forward, and this will be allowed because the restrainer, this would be the Antichrist working through a man, which would most certainly step forward when this happens. This is at the seventh trumpet. And by the way, right here, there is a huge gap in what the scriptures are indicating here. It says the wrath of God begins and the time of the dead. The time of the dead. So what's going on here? This is a literary device, same literary device used in the Gospels, where it mentions an event and then jumps over, skips a host of events, and mentions the latter event. That's actually the great white throne judgment. We'll come back to that later. If we look at the seventh vial of wrath, we can see the judgment upon Babylon. Babylon to drink the cup. Now, continuing on, that we're going to make this easier to understand, we'll drop the vials of wrath off here and just flow through what happens when the mystery of God is finished. The church goes into the wilderness for purging and refining. There's a beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit to make war with the two witnesses and overcomes them. There's another beast out of the sea. We find out that, well, there it is. There's the eighth, the beast that was and is not, whose deadly wound was healed. Now that the restrainer is removed, this beast will manifest through a man in the earth, through a king. Continuing on, there's war taking place. And by the way, this beast out of the sea, whose deadly wound was healed, makes war and overcomes these witnesses. They lay on the street for 3.5 days, symbolic of the 3.5 years, completing this seventh trumpet. So they begin at the seventh trumpet, most likely at the first, and end at the seventh. We have the symbolic meaning of 3.5 days. And then there's an earthquake that very hour. Continuing on, there's a beast that rises out of the earth that exercises all the power of that first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. There's widespread deception on earth. There's an image made for people to worship. And all the people are marked and categorized so that they may buy and sell. And finally, that brings us to the Lamb that's seen on Mount Zion with the 144,000. The 144,000 were those that were sealed way back in chapter 7. In fact, it says the seal judgments, they should be sealed, that the angels should not hurt the earth or the sea or the waters until these are sealed. So now we find that they show up with the Lamb on Mount Zion. So we'll get into that just momentarily. There's a proclamation and warnings that are made during this time when these appear. There's a gathering up of the elect up in the clouds, which Paul talked about in the epistles. And then there's another gathering where there is judgment. They are thrown into the wrath of God. Now, you find in Revelation chapter 7, verse 14, that this is consistent, this first one, the Lamb seen on Mount Zion, is consistent with the gospel accounts that say after that tribulation in Mark's account, or the tribulation of those days. So these guys, these 144,000, actually went through the first 3 woes and experienced great tribulation before they're taken up. This is the time of the gathering of the elect. We find that catching up happens in tandem with this gathering. So these 144,000 they go up to God, and the elect, they go up to Jesus to meet him in the air. This might be, I'm thinking like an event that occurs maybe not so much simultaneously, but in tandem, like back to back. These things, these things happen. The first fruits go up to God, and then the elect, the chosen, they go up to Jesus, and the others are cast into the winepress of God, where the wrath of God starts. So now that we see this pattern forming on the third woe, we can jump back to these vials of wrath. We left off where it says Babylon to drink the cup. We see immediately that these hailstones fall out. Now the timing of this is very short. This is Babylon is destroyed within 1 hour. So we're going to find, in fact, it says here the 10 kings receive power for 1 hour and give that power to the beast to destroy Babylon. After this destruction of Babylon, there's the marriage supper of the Lamb, white robes given to the saints, the armies of heaven. Then these elect and chosen that are gathered up to God and to Jesus, they come back and they make war with the beast and the kings of the earth and those that worship the image. And they're successful. We know that. The Bible says the beast is captured, Satan is bound, and the millennial reign of Christ begins. And these are those that have gone through the tribulation, have suffered, have been martyred for Christ. After this happens, Satan is released again for 1,000 years to deceive the nations. There's this great battle of Gog and Magog. The devil's cast into the lake of fire. And here's the great white throne judgment. Now, that's what I wanted to come back to. Back on the third woe, we looked at that. It went from the wrath of God all the way to the time of the dead. That's the judgment of the dead. The dead are resurrected and judged. That's the great white throne judgment. Then we see a new heaven and a new earth and the new Jerusalem, the bride, coming down. And I will stop it with that.